Reluctant Entrepreneur Tarot. I'm Diana Ideus, Master Certified Coach, and this video takes you behind the scenes of Reluctant Entrepreneur Tarot Card 10 patterns. So on this card, we have the patterns that you can see. So as you look up in the sky, especially in shout out to New Mexico, and the balloon festival, you see different patterns in the sky. You see that ascension, you see them turn. There's patterns we can observe and notice. As we look at what this is layered on, which is that kind of manhole cover or kind of sewer cover, is also what is within. And in the spirit of kind of as above, so below, there's a lot happening underneath the surface and inside us that's affecting how we show up and how we can actually, what we can actually see. So whether you're focused straight in front of you for the present moment, kind of looking that up and out or looking within, different ways that we look at the patterns that serve us or don't serve us. And the idea here, especially as we come into the tarot card that this is associated with, which is the Wheel of Fortune, is the idea of fate versus free will and that sense of change. So if you don't examine what currently is, it can be difficult to figure out how you want to change it, kind of looking at your inputs in order to impact your output, so to speak. So looking at that depth of the different patterns. So the quote associated with this is everything is a pattern, you just need to notice. So that reflection, that awareness, looking at, what is serving us, what is not serving us, what are our patterns and our trends. So oftentimes in performance management, people will point out an incident and then they may get frustrated that their direct report doesn't kind of pick up on the incident, or just, maybe not direct report, maybe even relationships, right? You forgot to unload the dishwasher kind of thing. But what usually people are responding to, or what we can have challenge with, is the pattern or trend over time. So even just having those conversations and having that awareness to say, hey, this is a pattern. Is there something we need to address in order to address this pattern, is very important when we look at kind of the entrepreneur's behaviors and kind of who someone is as an entrepreneur. Does your lack of communication affect your ability to be successful in business? Does your desire for extroversion mean that it's difficult for you to follow through on certain tasks? As well as kind of patterns or cycles in the business as the market fluctuates, as demand fluctuates. So as mentioned, this card is associated with Wheel of Fortune. So this card is rich with symbolism. The symbols on the wheel mean something. The characters around the wheel mean something. There's astrological symbols in the corner. So this has a lot of symbolism in it, but often what is associated with Wheel of Fortune is patterns or change, and the idea of what's fated versus what's free will, and which also brings up control. So we often want to be more in control of our circumstances, or agitated by the ambiguity, or not sure where to turn, and not sure, is this a moment where I'm able to impact something or not. But the spirit of the Wheel of Fortune is that you can always impact how you're reacting to something, even if you can't necessarily change like what is happening. So even as we go back to the air balloons, right? If you have ever seen hot air balloons, which I recommend every October in Albuquerque, and then also there's balloon festivals across the world. The way, well, and I guess there's YouTube as well. The way that, to change direction, or there's a way that the balloon gets gassed to ascend to a certain level. If you think about patterns below in a sewer system, there's maps, there's tunnels, there's pathways, there's things that connect. So looking at the depth of what's happening, not just as what is, but how is this part of a pattern or a cycle? How is that impacting change? What's in my control? So one of my favorite decks is Otherkin Tarot, and from this one, we have the Wheel of Fortune can be a cryptic and complex card. It reminds us of the cycles of life, of success and failure, love and loss. This card urges us to practice acceptance when we are faced with what we do not have power over. However, also it tells us to seize opportunities and make the best use of our resources. So if you're able to see this as a kind of call to action, if you're able to see and kind of examine, in that examine life, how is this serving me or not serving me? So with patterns, we see a relationship between the cards that precede it and the cards that follow it. So with the idea of identity, which in this deck, or in this deck is identity, but in traditional tarot is the Hermit, as we exclude ourselves and look within, it's easier to see the patterns. It's easier to make that examination of what is or what isn't serving us. Then, with the spirit of executive dashboard, which is the justice card, looking at with that calculated kind of rationality, how is this pattern serving me? How is this pattern not serving me? How am I progressing towards my goals? And not in an emotional way, but in a very kind of rational, you've examined things with the hermit, you've gotten and tapped into that inner knowing and wisdom via isolation. You then see, okay, what's fate here? What's free will? What's in my control or not my control? How am I going to adapt in this change or this period of the cycle? The executive dashboard presents really digging down and looking at that data and what is serving me or not serving me. There's a coolness about the justice card. And then the reluctant entrepreneur, which is the hanged man, then there's a percolation. There's that cocoon of the before the butterfly. And so the thing is that if we have knowledge that something is part of a pattern, and I'm sure it freaks that, well, I mean, I'm not a caterpillar, but I would anticipate that it's terrifying to a caterpillar to all of a sudden be in a cocoon. And then post cocoon, none of the caterpillar things apply to a butterfly life, but you have that natural progression. And when we're able as humans to see like, oh, this is part of the process, this is part of the progression, we tend to feel calmer, more safe, the idea that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So knowing that this examination of patterns, you don't just stop there. Oh, well, I do this. And so, this happens and, I'm good with it. I mean, if you're good with that pattern and it serves you, that's great. But it's also kind of moving that sense of movement. Like the wheel of fortune is always spinning. You don't stay at the top. You don't stay at the bottom. There's that cycle and that movement. So in the spirit of that cycle and movement, what are you examining? What's kind of marinating? And then how are you making decisions moving forward? So as we think about questions to consider, what patterns do you see in yourself and your business? How are your current patterns serving or not serving you? What's in your control? And what can you learn from this phase of the cycle? And sometimes this is hard to see for ourselves. Like, we can't see the label inside of the jar. It's easier to see the picture outside of the frame. So having people that you trust in your life, be those coaches or therapists or friends, or sometimes it's actually really helpful with people who've known you for a long time, having people who will straight talk and kind of help you see like, hey, that's a trend for you. Or, knowing that you have a tendency towards self-sabotage, or knowing that, you have a high level of enthusiasm at the beginning of a project, not looking at trying to change all your behaviors, but looking at how can you use what you have. So that's movement from the patterns to executive dashboard. It's like, don't get wrapped up in, oh, well, I wish I was this type of person, or I wish I was this type of way. I mean, I wish the market never dipped. I mean, you're not the only one with that wish, right? So it's looking at, okay, knowing that there will be those ebbs and flows. How do you win with the cards that you're dealt? Because you may or may not be able to swap out your cards. If you want to listen to more, the episode on health, we get into patterns and looking at how kind of examining patterns serve us, and just honestly the importance and the essentialness of health in the entrepreneur life, in the reluctant entrepreneur life, because health is often health is wealth, but health is often a pattern that gets ignored, especially on the entrepreneur side. And then it's something that has repercussions later in the business and makes it less likely that the business can sustain. The song for the patterns card is A Million Reasons by Lady Gaga. You're giving me a million reasons to let you go. You're giving me a million reasons to quit the show. You're giving me a million reasons. Well, as she continues, it then says, I've got 100 million reasons to walk away, but baby, I just need one good one to stay. So in the spirit of what information are you getting? What information are you wanting? How does that impact your decision? And then also, this song is also indicative of a pattern, right? There are a million reasons, and she's choosing to stay, even though the song indicates that that's painful. And then later in the song, every heartbreak makes it hard to keep the faith, but baby, I just need a good one, as in a good reason. And so the idea of faith and also with this card's association with fate. Also just the repetitive nature of this song speaks to me on the pattern side, and the idea of, will she stay? Will she go? It's unclear. It's unclear at this point in the song. It's unclear at this point in the cycle what's going to happen. So that can be challenging as well with our patterns. It'd be nice if we knew the outcome, but that would make it a really obvious choice. It's not an Excel formula. If this, then. So looking at the complexity of that, and just the complexity of the human experience, and the complexity of the experience of being in love or heartbroken, the complexity of the entrepreneurial experience, we don't have the answers. We have to kind of ride the ride, so to speak. But the more we know about ourselves and look at ourselves and our patterns, the more we can figure out, okay, how is this serving me or not serving me? And then, is this something that's going to boost my business and my quality of life, or is this something that's going to prevent my business or quality of life? As well as looking at the patterns of the seasons. So we have a tendency to pretend that, like, we want things to be sunny all the time, sunny and happy all the time, oftentimes. But the reality is that, the sun follows the moon, the night follows the day. Winter, spring, summer, fall, like there is a seasonality to it that we can tend to ignore in business, but there's patterns happening all around us. I read a book that where a gardener said, like, nothing blooms in every season. So it's unrealistic for you to try to expect yourself to do that. But we tend to ignore that and expect ourselves to bloom in every season. So food for thought on our patterns, and taking a look and doing that internal work, that kind of the work below the surface, and then also paying attention to how that impacts what we can see. And knowing as well that sometimes that takes time. Sometimes there's a lot of internal work that needs to happen before we see the outcome. And or sometimes the outcome that we get is not necessarily the outcome we're seeking, which has its pros and cons. So again, that kind of free will, fate, change patterns goes into the patterns in the Wheel of Fortune card. So if you found this helpful, check us out at Reluctant Entrepreneur Tarot on Instagram, or go into more depth at reluctantentrepreneur.tarot.com, where you can read descriptions about the card, these questions to consider, have links to the podcast, see this video, and then also sort out different ways to work with us. I'm wishing you well as you take a look at your patterns, and wishing you continued success.